Hello, Sylvia here.
Good evening, Sylvia. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And yourself?
Gratefully so. Yes, very much. Baruch
So
Hashem.
was it successful last week, the fundraising?
Oh yes, we beat the target, which is good, and
Oh,
um,
that's brilliant.
and with the help of many like yourself, it was a crowd effort. Absolutely, we were humbled by the response, though. Tremendous.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Because
Thank you
it
very much.
goes to a good cause, doesn't it?
Oh
You
yes,
know, yeah.
absolutely. It goes straight
And
back
that's
into the
the,
community.
yeah.
Straight back in.
And yeah. And I'm amazed with your food bank, absolutely amazed at how successful it is. And that, and
Yeah, and
let's
unfortunately,
hope.
there's a tremendous demand. There's a tremendous demand, unfortunately. Yes.
Well, I think it's the blessing. Yeah, it's unfortunate that we've got the demand, but the blessing that you can meet some of that demand,
Yeah, correct,
you know.
correct, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
we could be like some areas where there's no support,
Wow.
you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah, and it's nice because it keeps the community spirit going, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also on
You
both
know,
ways, both on both
yeah,
sides. Absolutely.
yeah. I'm amazed at, is it the Jewish Federation?
Yeah, the
And
Fed.
all their charity work as well that they do. I'm just
Yeah,
amazed at how as a community, you actually work so hard together to keep the community supported in everything.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
The starting
yeah,
point obviously is to recognize that everybody's created the image of Hashem. If that's
yeah.
the starting point, somebody else
And
takes on a whole different meaning.
wouldn't it be lovely if we had that everywhere?
Yes, absolutely. We've got the seven Noahide laws for all of humanity. It's definitely
Yeah,
up there, way up there, absolutely. What's
yeah.
the weather been
And
like out there in Wales?
well, we've had really bad rain again for a few days, but before that it was scorching hot. So you know,
Wow.
but you need the rain for the plants. So
Yeah.
you know,
Keeps
and,
things
uh,
growing. Keeps things growing.
and it clears the air as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Keep it nice and fresh. So
It's just one more
yeah, but
way of
other
Hashem
than that,
reminding us who's in control. You know, you want to stop the rain, you want to bring some cool down the heat. There's nothing you can do about it. If it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain. You better get some shelter. Hashem's
no,
in charge.
sometimes it gets that bad here. You're waiting for Noah to come flowing past. No,
Oh,
seriously, it really gets bad. And
really?
we have floods and everything lower down because the water rushes down the valley. We have
Wow.
major floods. We have major flood areas and things like that. Yeah, and sometimes even though we're not flooded, we can't get out because the major roads are all flooded.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, and they spent millions on flood defences and things, and they keep failing.
Really?
You can't. Yeah, you can't. Water's very powerful.
Yeah.
Water's very, very powerful. Water and fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Once they decide, and water once it decides. Have you ever seen videos of the tsunami in Japan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where it just shifts buildings it's like you've got a Lego model or something like that, and it just flushes it all away. But it isn't a Lego model; it's an
Yeah.
actual town, and all the engineering that goes into building and things like that. Yet nature can just wipe it all away.
Yeah. Nature's one of Hashem's tools. One of Hashem's
Yeah,
tools.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So are you bracing yourself for your lockdown your lift up of lockdown?
Well, we're treading carefully. I think the Chabad policy is going to be much more reserved than the government's guidelines. So we'll do it a bit slower and we'll be more
Yeah, because
careful.
we're not opening up in Wales.
No, Scotland, no, not either.
And you know, and it's just a matter of time, really. I think I hate these buzzwords that they use, but I think the new normal will be, like Leicester. They want to isolate Leicester and lock down Leicester,
Right.
and we've got problems on Llangefni and Anglesey, right?
Wow.
And they've got some meat processing plant that everybody's ill, with COVID
Gosh.
from, and people are saying, "Oh, you should lock down Llangefni," And, well, they could do that quite easily, just lock down Anglesey, just close the port and close the bridge from Bangor. And people can't get on or off the island if they wanted to. And then Wrexham, there's a big outbreak in Wrexham at the food processing plant.
Wow.
You know, but the strange thing is, which wasn't publicised an awful lot, was way back in the beginning of March, there was a big food processing plant in America, and they had over 1,500 cases of COVID.
Well, 1 second, sorry, I'm going to hold you there. Just because we're going to get started. But I do think that this week's Parshah discussion has in it, like a few of the previous ones, some interesting stories of similar, where Hashem demonstrates who runs the world, using the tools of nature and using tools of not nature to be able to demonstrate who decides what goes and what doesn't. So we're going to get started. Welcome everybody aboard. We're going to be talking about this week's double Torah reading for those shuls that will be open this week on the 4th of July, in celebration of the Independence Day of America from the British. They're going to be celebrating the lockdown lift at some level. So we're going to be copying what the Americans have been doing for a little bit carefully, and that is some shuls will actually be reading from the Torah inside the shul. Other places will still be closed, rightfully so, and certainly nobody should be pushed or cajoled to go into shul when they're not ready, because Jewish people have never been afraid of davening in secret or at home. That's not what phases us. What phases us is doing something that's the incorrect thing to do, and protecting lives by far is the most important thing to do. So davening in shul, davening at home, wherever we are, if you're going to be reading the Parshah, you'll be reading a double Parshah. If you learn your daily Chumash, which everybody should be doing if they could, you'll be reading double whammy every day, because this week we've got double energy. But besides for being a double energy week, we have a double Parshah, we also have two very important things that are going on in the Jewish calendar this week. Number one, this coming Shabbos is the celebration of the 12th of Tammuz, which since 1927 has been a worldwide Jewish celebration. All of Yiddishkeit celebrated in 1927. Things are a little bit different than they are now. And the eyes of the entire Jewish community worldwide were looking at what was going on behind the Iron Curtain, behind the Soviet Union, and we're trying to figure out how would it all end. And in Tafshin Chav Zayin in 1927, when the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi Yitzhak Schneerson, was arrested for what was then called the anti-communist activity, and he was imprisoned, and he was literally sentenced to death. All of Jewish leadership around the world were breaking their heads, trying to figure out what could we do to turn the tide. And the miracle happened. The miracle happened on the 12th of Tammuz, and it became a day of celebration across the entire world. After the previous Rebbe was released from prison, he left the former Soviet Union, he ended up in Poland, and he came to visit the United States of America. And every city he went to, he was welcomed as the man who stood up to Stalin. And that's exactly what he was. The man who, with Hashem's help, didn't stop for anything and continued to bring forth and to carry the torch of Torah and bring Judaism, make it available to every person at every age, regardless of the cost. And the underground continued. After he left Russia, he continued to lead the underground from the long arm of Chabad. And tremendously, the Rebbe took over. And from America, from New York, he conducted all sorts of clandestine activities that kept Yiddishkeit alive, so much so that in the 90s, when the communist regime fell, Yiddishkeit was underground waiting to pop out. For some people, that meant they knew they were Jewish, which otherwise would have been impossible. For some, it meant that they knew something about their Judaism. And for many, it just meant that they knew that Judaism existed. So that when a new Chabad Shliach came out to Russia, the fire was there ready to explode, and it did. tremendously across the whole former Soviet Union, which is an enormous amount of land, an enormous amount of Yiddish people. But this Shabbos is the celebration of where the man who stood up to Stalin, the Friedrich Rebbe went to Mesiras Nefesh, was released from Soviet jails after being sentenced to death and all sorts of terrible things. Was first mitigated and it was turned into a prison sentence, an exile sentence. And on 12th of Tammuz, he was told, "You're free to go home." Amazing. It was unbelievable. And every year, the Rebbe would make a Farbrengen that was then televised. In those days, to put something onto Sky Television was unbelievable. Where there was a big truck that would come up outside 770 with these enormous dishes, the satellite dishes, and they would literally broadcast from outside 770 the Farbrengen live onto the televised channels, and that was available to people all around the world. It was an enormous, enormous celebration in 770 and around the world, and that's coming up this Shabbos. Was Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, so it's Shabbos and Sunday, a very, very special day. Special because what it tells us is that regardless of what's going on around us, we can do it. And Hashem gives us the koyach, gives us the strength, the energy, the ability to be able to win. Now, we're not just talking about standing up to Stalin. We're not just talking about standing up to enormous tyranny and very, very large scale, but the same concept works for every little Yetzer Hara. Every time the evil inclination stands up against us, we turn around and say, yes, we can. And even if, let's say, we said 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the Yetzer Hara of being sad, or the Yetzer Hara of being worried or anxious. These are real Yetzer Haras. And they're so real, not just because it's a real problem, that's true, but also because it's real that it happens to us. It happens to us even if we're not thinking about it. We get worried, we get anxious, we get upset, and we get down. That's part of the human condition in 2020. It's just how the world is conditioning us all the time. And we turn around to that Yetzer Hara and we say, yes, we can. Yes, we can stand up. If the Friedrich Rebbe was released from prison by the tyranny itself, we can overpower the sadness, the brought on depression, as the wise mashpiyas like to say, we bring it upon ourselves, but we can change it. And it's this week that we draw the energy to tell ourselves that we can win that battle as well. And then there's another wonderful thing in this week's Parshah. In the Jewish calendar, outside of Eretz Yisrael, all around the world will be reading Parshas Chukas and Bolok. And Parshas Bolok is the only place in the Torah that includes a prophecy about Mashiach. Mashiach. The redemption is not spoken about anywhere in the Torah. You've got to imagine that all of the 5 books of the Torah are discussing going into Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, the first time round. So they're not going to talk about what's going to happen when we get thrown out of Eretz Yisrael and we'll be in Galus, and then we'll have to be redeemed, and only then will we get to the Mashiach, to the final redemption. But Bilam, the nasty piece of work that he was trying to curse the Yiddish people, and then instead of curses coming out, only blessings came out, and at a certain point, after 3 times trying, he says, you know what, enough. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the end of days for this people. At the end of days, meaning a long time, I see it, but it's not now, it's in a long time. And he starts talking about Dorach Koichav Miyakov. There will be a redeemer. Mashiach's going to come and he's going to whip the Yiddish people out of Galus. It's in the Torah in this week's Parshah. The prophecy that Mashiach will come. So if there's ever a time to ask Hashem, no, let's have Mashiach already now, this is it. Let's make it happen today. Let's make it happen this week, because it's the energy of this week's Parashah. It's a double Parashah. It's Yud Beis Tammuz, and it's the prophecy of Mashiach this week. Okay, so if that's what's going on this week, we approach the Parashah. We're going to do a summary of the Parashah, and then we're going to be looking out for a relevant message that's going to empower us to be able to make that our reality. Let's make Mashiach happen. Okay, so here goes. Summary of the Parashah. Parashas Chukas starts off simple because we don't understand it anyway. A mitzvah, an instruction that doesn't make sense. Different types of instructions the Torah includes. Some of them are obvious. Don't kill. We get it. Easy peasy. We would figure it out ourselves, perhaps. Then you have mitzvahs that make sense, but we wouldn't have thought of themselves. Eat matzah on Pesach. We know why. We eat matzah on Pesach because we left Egypt. We've got to remember what happened. Who would have thought that that's the best way to think of and remember leaving Mitzrayim? Probably not all of us, but it makes sense. And then there's mitzvahs that do not make sense. One of them is the mitzvah of this week's parsha, the Chukas. The Chukas of Chukas, which is the red heifer. The red cow, the person came in contact with a dead body, you went to a funeral, went to a cemetery, went to a levaya, whatever it was, person came in contact with a dead person. Dead bodies carry spiritual impurity. Spiritual impurity cannot be cleaned in the shower or in the bath. They have to be cleansed in a spiritual recipe. So sometimes it's enough to go to mikveh. When it comes to coming in contact with a body, this week's parasha tells us the way to cleanse oneself is by getting a sprinkling of the parah adumah, which basically is, they would find a red cow that was red from head to toe, with not a drop of color on it, only red. They would take it outside of the camp, and then the deputy Kohen Gadol would build a bonfire. And after slaughtering the cow, would take all the pieces of the meat in the body of the cow and put it into a bonfire with lots of wood, and included in it was a special recipe of a particular grass and a particular piece of wood, and it would be burnt. But it had to be burnt outside the camp. Once the fire died down, they would then collect all the ashes they could get and store the ashes in containers. Whenever somebody needed to be cleansed from coming in contact with a dead body, which was probably quite often, every time there was a funeral, there was a whole lot of people. Every time someone went to visit a cemetery, a whole lot of people. And in order for them to be able to go into visit the Beis HaMikdash, a temple of Hashem, or to consume, to eat any part of a carbon, they would have to go through this process. And what would they do? The Kohen would take a little bit of the ashes from this container of ashes that would come from the red heifer and add it to a bowl of fresh mayim chayim, spring water. And that spring water would have a little bit of ashes, and on the third and seventh day of the purification process, the Kohen would stand before this individual who needs to be purified and sprinkle from the water that has ashes in it upon the person who's become pure. None of this made sense. And that's why it's called a chayk. And in case that wasn't enough of not making sense, there was an additional twist that made even less sense, and that was that the Kohen who was purifying the purifiee, if that makes sense, the person who needed purification, the Kohen who was administering the process would himself contract a slight level of impurity because he was involved in purifying the other. So that would work out that the person who was impure became pure, and the person who was pure, the Kohen, would contract an impurity. And it didn't make sense. If this is a method of purity, how did the Kohen become impure? And if it was able to purify the impure person, how did the Kohen drop in level? And this was one of those rules that didn't make sense, wasn't supposed to make sense, and we're supposed to learn it even though it doesn't make sense. And this is what we're learning. However clever the human mind is, it's only so great. It's only been programmed by Hashem. And Hashem programmed us and installed software in our minds, in our capacity, up to a point. And beyond that point, we just don't get it. We don't get it. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't make it less correct. Of course not. Hashem is beyond logic. Hashem allowed logic to reach a certain level of how much He wants us to reach. These are one of those windows into how limited logic is. A chukah, a non-understandable mitzvah. That's the first introduction to our parsha. How powerful, how fantastical. What an intro to a parsha. But then there's stories upon stories that go afterwards. We jump almost 40 years, and we start talking about what happens at the end of the 40-year sojourn of the Jewish people in the desert. We learn what happens when all of a sudden the water supply gets turned off. There's no water. What happened? All 40 years they had the well, Miriam's well. Why was it called Miriam's well? Because it was in the honor and the merit of Miriam. How do we know that? We know that was in Miriam's honor because in this week's parsha, when she passes away, when Miriam is no longer around, just like that, the water switches off. 40 years. Imagine for 40 years, all you know that bread falls from heaven and the water comes from a miracle well. The campsite changes, the miracle well comes along with us. It's not a hole in the ground. It's a miracle well. And all of a sudden, After 39 years, that's all we know. Boom, no water. They come rushing to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe and Aaron are still mourning for their sister. They're sitting Shimba. And all the Yidden come complaining. They come to Hashem, and that's when the famous story, which we'll talk about today, Moshe hits the rock and the re-jump starts. The water supply, but Hashem is very upset at what happens and punishes Moshe and tells him, from now on, we'll change our plans. You will no longer be the leader that will take the Yiddish people into Eretz Yisrael. Instead, your successor will lead the Jews into Israel. And then the Parshah continues that after Miriam passed away and the water supply stopped and was restarted in Moshe's merit, Aaron passes away. And the whole story of Aaron goes up to the higher mountain, and there he lays down, and Moshe helps him change his clothing and give it over to his son. Elazar becomes the successor, and then Aaron passes away. And now Miriam passed away, and Aaron's passed away. But as Aaron passes away, the clouds of glory that protected the Jewish people disappear. And now there's a new problem. They're open with no protection to enemy attack. And unfortunately that happens. The Yiddish people start complaining. And if they start complaining again, Hashem punishes the Jewish people again complaining. And this time he sends in serpent snakes. And they come and they start biting the Jewish people. And people are very ill. People are going to die. And Moshe Rabbeinu davens to Hashem again and asks on behalf of the Jewish people. And Hashem tells him this time he should build a copper or brass snake and should hang it on the top of a stick. And that way when the people realize that the snake isn't nature on its own, there is no such thing. The natural snake that's so dangerous is from high up. It's also from Hashem. The dangerous snake and serpent is a messenger from Hashem. All we need to do is recognize that everything that's happening in my life is from Hashem. And that will become the source of healing, which worked. As they looked up to the serpent hanging and remind themselves that everything is from high above, one by one they got better. This was a miracle story that took place. We also have the song of praise that the Jewish people sang to thank Hashem for the well of Miriam. And then we have the war number one, the first step towards conquering Israel. Now, we did say that Moshe and Aaron aren't going to Israel. So they clearly weren't conquering the land of the promised land on the west bank of the River Jordan, which we call mainland Israel. But on the east bank, Sichon and Og were two great, mighty countries. And the Jewish people conquered those two countries like nothing. Sichon and Og's country are conquered, and that was going to become the first foothold the Yiddish people had into the land of Israel. And Moshe Rabbeinu is still here. Moshe Rabbeinu is there alive, and he gets to go into the non-mainland Israel. But that's as far as he's going to get to go. That's how Parshah's Chukas closes. Parshah's Bolok, which is the second of these Parsha, continues from that narrative, from that story. And this is where the neighboring country, Sichon and Og, witnesses and sees how powerful the Jews are on his doorstep. And the king of Moab, which is a neighboring country, a fellow called Bolok, he's starting to get very worried. If that's what they can do to the powerful countries, what's going to happen if they turn the guns on me? I stand no chance. And therefore he started to get very worried. And as the story famously goes, he goes to look for somebody who can match the power of the Jew. The Jews pray. He wants somebody who can come and use prayer, soothsaying, to be able to attack the Jewish people. He doesn't want to fight them with sticks and stones, with bows and arrows and swords and spears. Instead, he wants to attack the Jewish people with the power of talk, speech. So he hires a sorcerer named Bilam from a different country, and he teams up together with Midian, and they hire him to come and curse the Jews. And the whole story, how Hashem tells Bilam, Hashem would speak to him and he tells him, where are you going? And eventually he says, I'm going to do this very important mission. I need to curse the Jewish people. And Hashem's like, curse the Jewish people? What are you on about? They're my chosen people. You can go, eventually he tells him, but you're not going to curse them. You're going to do as I want. You're going to go there and you're only going to do what I want. And Bilam thinks, you know what? There's plenty of money in this deal. If I manage to pull this off, it's worth the risk. I'll go down there. and I'll see if there's a way to manipulate, to make that this, that. I'll be able to do it, and I'll win. He travels, and the angel tries to stop him from traveling because it's obviously very upsetting. He's trying to curse the Jewish people. He's trying to destroy the Jews. And as he makes his way there, and he comes up, and he meets the king Bolok, and Bolok takes him to see the people. He says, "These are the people that we're trying to curse them. They're a danger to our society." And Bilam opens his mouth after doing offerings and sacrifices, and instead of any curses coming out, every time he opens up his mouth, the most beautiful brachas and blessings that the Yiddish people ever got come flowing from the Jew hater anti-Semite Bilam. In the whole Torah, the most beautiful brachas flowing from his mouth. Tries once, and Bolok said, "How are you doing? What are you doing here? I asked you to curse them, you're blessing them." Second time, same thing. Third time, same thing. And that's when he turns around and says, "You know what, Bolok? It ain't going to happen. Let me tell you what's going to happen to you guys. And I'll tell you what's going to happen to all the nations that mess with the Jewish people. I'll tell you what's going to happen to the Jewish people." And that's one by one, he turns his eyes to each nation around. He's on the hilltops. And he says, "You know what's going to happen to Amalek? You know what's going to happen to Seir, to Edom? You know what's going to happen to the Jewish people?" And that's when he starts telling the future, which we mentioned earlier. He mentions Mashiach, talks about the future. Amalek will be destroyed, the whole thing. And then before he leaves, he's obviously terribly embarrassed, really, really messed up the whole thing, hasn't managed to give a single curse. Instead, he's blessed the Jews one after the next. And he says to Bolok, "You know what? I couldn't help you with what I'm good at, but I hate the Jews more than you do. And I want to give you an idea of how you can get the Jews to self-destruct." And unfortunately, he was so right. Unfortunately, he was too right. He told Bolok, "You want to get the Jews? All you have to do is get them to upset Hashem. Get them to commit sins that Hashem hates, and Hashem will destroy them. You won't have to worry about it." And he says to him, "I've got a good idea how you can do it. It's a high price to pay, but it's probably worth it for you." And there you have the prophet, the non-Jewish prophet, advising his followership to drop their level of modesty to the lowest, most base level. And he basically says, take your best, most beautiful girls and go get them to entice the Jewish boys, and then convince them, besides for the adultery and the rest, convince the Jewish boys that they can only have fun together if they commit idolatry. And Hashem hates idolatry. And oh boy, was he right, because it worked like a charm. Unbelievable. One after the next, the Jewish boys who were there were being enticed, and a plague breaks out amongst the Jewish people. And a lot of people are dying. And at this point, it's only because of Bilam's plan. And they come rushing to their leaders, and they say, "What's going to happen? We have to go and stop this." And unfortunately, the leadership weren't necessarily, all of them, much better than the followership in this case. And the one particular fellow from the tribe of Shimon, his name was Zimri, who was one of the leaders of the tribe of Shimon, comes before Moshe, and with him is one of the non-Jewish princesses of Midian, and he says to Moshe, "What's stopping me to living with this girl? You're also married to a Midianite. Your wife is Sipporah, the daughter of Yisro, right? She's from Midian, and if you can live with a Midianite, I can." And everybody's looking, and they're stunned at the chutzpah, the audacity that this fellow has. He's supposed to be a Jewish leader, and he's speaking like this to Moshe, and he's suggesting that it's okay to go and do this terrible sin. And then they walk off together into the tent. And as the door closes, Pinchas says to Moshe, "What do you mean? We can't let this happen. He's desecrating Hashem's name in public. This is the worst thing that could happen." And Moshe says to him, "You can do what you need to do. I can't get involved." He says to him, "You should go carry out. You're the one who brought it up." And Pinchas goes in, storms into the tent, and he kills the two of them in the act. And at that moment, the plague that was killing so many Jewish people stops in an instant. In the merit of Pinchas. And that's how the Parshah closes. And that's the end of the Parshah. Next week's Parshah, we'll discuss how Hashem turns around and says, "I am so proud and grateful to Pinchas, to what he did. I'm going to reward him." But that's next week. That's this week's Parshah. a loaded parsha. There's so many details that we can learn from. How we can connect our strong points, our weak points, how we can see the treasure Hashem has, how much He appreciates and treasures each and every one of us. There's so many details to learn. But today we're going to focus on one particular area. And the area is going to be not so much how we can only help ourselves, maybe become the best person we can become, more so. It's going to be that. Plus, we're going to describe one of the favorite topics the Rebbe has, which is that every individual needs to be a lamp lighter. Lamp lighter. Help someone else's lamp shine. Help someone else stand up bright. And that sort of idea of being a leader, not just being a good follower, but everybody has to lead on their level. Tremendous lesson from this week's Parshah. So we're going to look at one particular area, and we're going to do almost like Paradise, where you have Shivim Panim the Torah, 70 explanations for each verse. We're going to look at one area of the Parsha, ask the question, and we're going to look at multiple levels of answers. And each level, each deeper answer will give us another window of a lesson of what we can learn from this particular area of the Torah. Just before we start, I want to say that having one quote with multiple explanations doesn't mean that one is more right and the other is more wrong. It just means it's a deeper and deeper understanding of the same idea. I heard a beautiful mashal for this from Rabbi Chazan, where he was explaining, I think I might have shared this before, but I like it, so I'm going to say it again. And that is the mashal of the Niagara Falls, where he says, what's the Niagara Falls? It's a waterfall. So some people, it's a picture. If you are a wedding planner, then it's a great selling point. You can suggest, you can bring a bride and a groom to get married, a chas and kala, at the Niagara Falls with that as a backdrop. Oh, it's fantastic. If you're a painter, it's a brilliant painting to paint. If you're a scientist, you get into the science of how it works, how it happens, how it developed. If you're a historian, you might talk about the history of what took place there, what sort of big things, events happened there. If you're an engineer, to you, the Niagara Falls is how much energy is being generated or could be generated from the falling powerful waters that are coming down. And each person has their understanding. It's not that one's wrong and one's right, but each one's seeing it from their perspective. And they're all right. They all have a correct point. From a different viewpoint, you get to appreciate a different element, a different side of the exact same idea. Torah is no less. Torah is much more like that. Every pasuk, every incident, every story that we read, we can derive and draw out from it another lesson and a different angle and a different understanding that can encourage us and uplift us in more and multiple ways. So that's what we're going to do. We'll look at one idea and walk away with hopefully 3, or maybe even we have time, 4 lessons that we can have from this one particular area of the Parshah of this week, Parshas Chukas and Bolok. Let's put it on the screen for those of us who have the screen, Chukas Bolok. Say it soft, always. Effective leadership is always soft-spoken. I'm going to say a little l'chaim here. And we're going to read a little bit about effective leadership skills that we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu in this parasha. One of the things that the Baal Shem Tov teaches us about how we learn lessons in life is that sometimes or oftentimes it's easier for us to learn what not to do, not from our own mistakes, but from seeing someone else's mistake. How does that work? Baal Shem Tov calls it the mirror effect. Hashem wants to show us how we can improve. But I don't notice my own mistakes. I love myself too much. I don't even notice I did something wrong. So what does Hashem do? He sets me up so that I notice someone else did something wrong. And then I say, hey, look how terrible this guy just did, or this so-and-so just did something. So that's so incorrect. Says the Baal Shem Tov, why did I notice that? How is it that I notice so-and-so's wrongdoing? And the answer is, says the Baal Shem Tov, Hashem's teaching me that I have a similar type of issue, perhaps not in the exact same form, but the same sort of problem. And by noticing somebody else has it, that's Hashem reminding me how I can fix, grow, improve, and become the better me that I could be. So when I see someone else's mistake, it's Hashem's softer way of helping me improve. So instead of thinking of, oh, it's my opportunity to tell someone off, I have to think of it, it's now my opportunity to find where in my life I can improve based on so-and-so's mistake. How does it reflect on my life? Not to take away that we have a responsibility to help someone else grow, but that's usually the first stop, the first point of call. Okay? If anyone has any questions, any comments and observations, please anytime speak up. We're going to go into one area of this week's parasha that points out somebody else's mistake, and we're going to try and learn a lesson from someone else's mistake. Who are we talking about? We're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. In all the Torah, we learn one time that there was a sin that Moshe Rabbeinu had that he was punished for so greatly. And that is this sin. The sin of Moshe Rabbeinu, instead of talking to the rock and drawing water for the people by talking, Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock instead. Terrible, terrible Avera. He hit the rock instead of talking to the rock. And his punishment was so extreme. His entire life, he dreamt of being able to serve Hashem with all the mitzvahs, which can only be done in the Holy Land of Israel, in Eretz Yisrael. And he couldn't wait to go into Eretz Yisrael. He loved the land. And he was waiting so eagerly to be able to go in. And now, what's his punishment going to be? You cannot go in. You cannot go into Eretz Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu passed away outside of mainland Israel. And that's the punishment that Moshe Rabbeinu had for hitting the rock instead of talking to the rock. Now, it seems like that was the problem. Although we're going to read the psukim, it's very vague. It doesn't say clearly what the sin is. I've made it sound like the problem was that he hit the rock instead of talking to the rock. That's what Rashi says. But it's not clear in the pasuk. There's actually tens of commentaries that explain the sin one way and another way and a different way. One crime had became a whole list of crimes that Moshe Rabbeinu did. But it's not so much that Moshe Rabbeinu did a problem, did a mistake, but instead of the other way around, it's a list of different lessons that we could learn from the same story that was written vaguely inside. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we understand what the sin of Moshe was, and then try and learn, why is the Torah telling me about this sin if this is the sin? What can I learn from that? How can I become a better person from noticing or being made to notice Moshe Rabbeinu's wrongdoing? Here we go. Start off with text 1a. 1a teaches us about how powerful the well of Miriam was, how special it was, how miraculous it was. Now, just to start off by saying the well of Miriam wasn't a hole in the ground. Because if it was a hole in the ground, when they changed the camping site, which happened 42 times, they changed camping sites, the hole in the ground would have to fill up and start a new hole somewhere else. It wasn't like a hole in the ground. It was almost like the rock just gave forth water, and it traveled with them for 40 years. How far back does this miracle go? 2,500 years before the Jewish people. We have here in Maseches Pesachim, our rabbis taught 10 things were created in the 6 days of creation. On the eve of Shabbos, that's the 6th day. Just before Shabbos started, these are the well, man, the rainbow, the writing instruments, the tablets, the sculpture of Moshe, the sculpture of Moshe, and the cave in which Moshe and Eliyahu stood, the opening of the donkey's mouth, which is also the 6th parasha, the donkey that spoke to Bilam, the opening of the earth's mouth, which was Korach, swallow up the wicked. Says Rashi, what's the well that was referring to? The well of Miriam, the rock from which Moshe brought out water. Now, just to highlight how miraculous this was, it was round, sieve-like. It's almost like maybe your drain of your sink. And water sprouted up. It went along with them wherever they would go. How would it have enough water supply? How would it have enough pressure to be able to produce that much water for that many people? You're talking about 3 million people roughly. And that was part of the miracle. Each head of the Shevet would come every time they pitched up and they had a new camping site. And once the rock started giving water again, he would put his staff, in the sand right next to the water and draw a line from the well to his camping site of his team, of his tribe. and that line of a stick would turn into a canal. And the water would flow down through this canal, and his entire tribe would have enough water to drink, to cook, to wash, to mikvah, to everything included. And that was one of the miracles, enormous. And it's this rock that we're talking about over here in this week's Parshah that the Jewish people see it's dried up once Miriam passes away. And Moshe and Aaron come rushing to Hashem, and they say, in the middle of the shiva for their sister, say, Hashem, what's going to be? How are they going to have water? So we're going to read halfway through. Hashem spoken to Moshe saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock in the present so that it will give forth its water. You shall bring forth water from them, from the rock, and give the congregation the livestock to drink. Now I'm going to ask you just to read through this one more time. Are they taking their staff, their stick, to the rock? Or is he going just to talk to the rock? Have a look through what it says. Does he need his stick with him, or does he not need his stick with him?
No, he doesn't need a stick.
He doesn't need a stick. I'm going to read the pasuk one more time. For those of us who don't have it on the screen, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron. The staff in English is not the staff as in your colleagues. Kachasamate means take staff as in your stick. He does need a stick.
No, but only because Hashem told him to. But didn't he only tell him to because he wants to make it like it's sort of, not that it's just a total miracle, even though of course it is. But like, if you would just walk up to it and do nothing, then that would be even more.
Okay, yeah, it should look like it's as natural as could be. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, so one angle is he took his staff to make it look natural, but we're going to realize, we're going to look, and we're going to learn that actually this is going to be an important part of understanding Moshe Rabbeinu's mistake. The question we're going to ask is, what was the big deal? Yes, of course, Hashem told him to speak to the rock, and then the pasuk continued to say that Moshe took the rod from before Hashem as he commanded him. Moshe and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, now listen, you rebels. Listen, you rebels. Can we draw water for you from this rock? Rashi says that the Jewish people said to Moshe, what do you care which rock? Just do it to any rock. And Moshe's like, what are you on about? Only the rock that Hashem says gives forth water. What do you think, rocks give out water? You've been spoiled for 40 years. It's a miracle. Only Hashem can do this. Moshe raised his hand, struck the rock with a staff twice, when an abundance of water gushed forth, and the congregation, the livestock drank. Why does he hit the rock twice? Says Rashi, the first time he hit the rock, it was the right rock this time, but because he wasn't supposed to hit it, he was supposed to have spoken to it. The rock's like, hold on 1 second. I'm not supposed to be giving water because you hit me, but I don't want to embarrass you, Moshe. I'll give forth a bit of water, but talk to me. And then Moshe Rabbeinu hits it again. He's like, oh, you know what? This is not going to work the proper way. We're just going to have to go the other way, plan B. And it starts gushing forth full water just by hitting. But it seems like everything's okay. Moshe Rabbeinu's jump-started, is restarted, switched back on the water supply. Everyone's happy. And the congregation and the livestock are drinking and things are good. But Hashem's not happy. Hashem's furious. Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, since you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly to the land which I have given them. These are the waters of strife, where the children of Israel contended with Hashem, and he was sanctified through them. Everyone came to see that if you don't listen to Hashem, it's a big price to pay. So now, I want you to read, if you don't mind, please. What is Hashem saying is the reason for the punishment? Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, since, fill in the blank, therefore. What's that blank? Since something, that's why you'll be punished. What was the problem that Hashem had with Moshe and Aaron's conduct?
Because he said, because you do not believe in me.
There you go. You did not have faith in me. So the problem is something to do with faith. Now, where in the story did Moshe lack in faith? Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock instead of talking to the rock. Is that a lack of faith? So we're going to learn that actually different commentaries highlight different parts of the story and explain the wrongdoing or the crime, so to speak, of Moshe in a different way. Now, as we said earlier, this is not in order for us to judge Moshe. Who are we? It is in order for us to walk away with an uplifting, motivating lesson that can help us and help me be the best person I can be. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly go through one lesson or one explanation and its lesson, another explanation in its lesson. And that way we'll build up a beautiful building of fantastical, uplifting lessons that we can learn for one after the next. So here goes. The first answer we're going to learn is the simplest or most basic understanding. If you're familiar with Pardes, Pshat, Remesh, Drus, and Soid, 4 levels deeper upon deeper of how we learn Torah, Pshat is the simple or the basic understanding of the storyline, and that is Moshe Rabbeinu, total sum of his crime was that he hit the rock instead of talking to the rock. There was nothing else. That was the sum total of the crime. So why was he punished so harshly? Why did he get such a terrible punishment? So the answer is, according to the Midrash Rabbah, according to the Chizkuni, the answer is it the Chizkuni? I apologize, it's the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, the problem is that he made a mistake, and for Moshe Rabbeinu on his level, he had grown so much, he was expected to get it right, bang on. Had we made that mistake, we would be well within the safety buffer. For Moshe Rabbeinu, he was literally held to a higher standard. Let's just read this inside. God told him, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me by speaking the rock, because he holds the righteous to account for deviating even a hair's breadth. The smallest amount of change, of deviation, is already considered a sin. Now, just in order to highlight how difficult getting this right was, we're going to learn 2 quotes, 2 reasons to justify Moshe's mistake. How did Moshe Rabbeinu make the mistake? So number 1, we're going to learn a Ramban that's going to tell us, actually, Moshe Rabbeinu was held to such a high standard. It was very excusable, so to speak, to make the mistake. Says the Ramban, Moshe Rabbeinu was told to bring with the staff, the stick. And Moshe Rabbeinu is thinking, why am I taking with the stick? Because when Hashem tells me talk to the rock, what language do I talk to the rock in? What language do rocks talk? English? Yiddish? Hebrew? What language do you talk to a rock in? Hashem tells me take with my stick. I understand which language they speak. They speak the language of touch. And therefore I'll go and touch the rock with a stick, with the staff that I've been told to bring with. So when Hashem says speak to the rock, says the Ramban, it's excusable that Moshe could have assumed that speak to the rock means speak with the staff. And if that's not enough, he goes a step further, because actually this is not the first time Moshe Rabbeinu is starting a well of water. 40 years earlier, he started the exact same well. Because the story was almost word for word verbatim, took place exactly the same. Jewish people complained there's no water to drink, was parched in the desert. And Moshe speaks to Hashem. Hashem says, start the well from the rock, take with your staff. And that time Hashem says to him, and behold, I shall stand there before you on the rock in the Chorev. You shall, Chorev is Har Sinai, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moshe did so before the eyes of the elders of Israel. There was a precedent. There was a good reason why Moshe thought if he's taking the stick, it means hit the rock. Because that's what he was supposed to do. That's what he was supposed to do 40 years ago. And it's the same rock that's been turned off. He needs to turn on back that same rock. Why shouldn't he use the stick to hit it again? And yet, Moshe Rabbeinu was expected, on his level, to not make that mistake, to get it right. What's the lesson for us? The fact that somebody else is excused for their mistakes, the fact that somebody else isn't getting it right, it's okay for them. But I know that I can expect more for myself. Don't drop my bar. Don't sell myself short. Step up. Just like Moshe was told, step up. Don't give yourself the excuses. And that's how Moshe Rabbeinu paid a very high price, because on the level that he was held, and he held himself, and Hashem held him to a higher standard. Lesson number 1. And then we dig deeper. And this is going to be lesson number 2. Lesson number 2 is that actually the sin that Moshe Rabbeinu committed was not the fact that he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock, because that's excusable, as we just explained perhaps. But it's a different point. In the storyline we read, Moshe Rabbeinu, amongst other things, turned around to the Jewish people and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels." And Rashi explains, why did he call them rebels? He actually used the word Shimuna HaMoirim. Moirim, Rashi says, could either mean rebels or it could mean fools. And he explains from a Greek expression, Moirim could mean someone, almost like in the English word, a moron. It means somebody who is not clever. And Moshe Rabbeinu makes fun of the people. And he says, what are you talking about? How foolish could you be? Everything comes from Hashem. And Hashem says to Moshe, you're not wrong, everything comes to me. But don't you be calling my kids. Don't you be making fun of my children. And if you are no longer the worthy or the ideal leader to lead my people. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're right. You have every reason to be upset at them, but don't call them names. Beautiful medrash. Let's read it inside. Medrash Psikta Rav Kahana. What was Moshe announced to a king who placed his son under the charge of a tutor, and he instructs the tutor, do whatever you have to do to teach him, but don't make fun of him. Do not call my son a moira. Says the medrash. What is a moira? Like the Greek word one shouts to a fool, moros. Moros being the Greek word for dull, slow, or stupid. I guess that's pretty similar to what someone might say someone a moron. Once it happened that the tutor called the boy moira, the king said to him, with all my soul I ordered you and said, do not call my son a moira. And yet you call him a moira. A wise man has no business with a fool. So it is written, and Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron and commanded them to children of Israel. What did he command them? He told them, do not call my children fools. Once they antagonized him at the waters of strife, which is this one's Parshah. And at that point, Moshe said to them, Shimuna HaMoirim, hear now, you Moirim. And then Hashem says to them, with all my being and command you and told you, do not call my children Moirim. Now that you've called out Moira, a wise person does not go along with a fool. You cannot be the leader that will lead them into Eretz Yisrael. I need someone else to do that. 40 years, fantastic leadership. You've been brilliant. But a leader has to believe in the followership, believe in the people. If I can't believe in the people, I'm not yet a leader. And here, unbelievable lesson. If I am the leader of whoever it may be, of myself, of my spouse, of my family, of a classroom, whatever it is, if I'm the leader, I must believe in the people. And if I don't, how can I ever expect to be a leader? How can I expect them to follow? Says Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is perhaps a new generation. 40 years was the previous generation, but now the next round, I need someone else who's going to believe in the people, who's going to know that even if they get it wrong, they're still okay. And they're still going to believe that they can be led. Moshe Rabbeinu, if you're calling them Moirim, I need to find someone else. You won't go into Eretz Yisrael. Somebody else will lead them in. What an unbelievable lesson. The Parshah is telling us the story of Moshe's mistake, according to the Midrash, to Psikta Rav Kahana, in order to help us realize how important it is to believe in people, even whilst they're making a mistake. That's not who they are. That's not what they are. It's something that they've done, but I believe that they can be better. That's lesson number 2. How are we doing for time? Okay, lesson number 3. We're going to try and get 3 and hopefully 4 in. Let's learn lesson number 3. Lesson number 3 is Moshe's mistake was on the screen. Moshe's mistake was the insult to people, calling them morim and fools, and that wasn't okay. Lesson number 3 is going to be the Rebbe's take on the story. And here we go into, as you said, deeper and deeper. We're going to do a Hasidic spin on the storyline. I say Hasidic, you'd be excused to calling this mystical Kabbalistic, because the Kabbalah of a stone giving forth water, which Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to achieve, is just loaded. What's a stone? What's water? What does it mean to draw forth? And there's 2 ways to do so. And you can draw forth water through hitting, or you can draw forth water through talking. It says that Mittler Rebbe, here this text is just showing us that everything that happens in this world is a reflection of what's really taking place in the spiritual worlds. And if we do something down here, that in turn causes changes to take place in the upper world. So when we do a mitzvah, good things are happening upstairs. If we do a non-mitzvah, the non-good things are happening upstairs. And the idea is that whatever's happening upstairs then reflects back down on us. So hitting the rock caused whatever hitting the rock upstairs means, which in return came back with the effect that it was. Says the Alter Rebbe here tells us that what is water compared to? Water is compared to Torah. Why is Torah compared to water? So one of the ways to explain it is that water comes from the clouds. Now, if you took a cup and scooped up a piece of cloud, you wouldn't have much in the cup because the water in the cloud is of a different texture. It's just the moisture. But it's the same moisture that turns into water, and when we drink a cup of water, we're drinking clouds. It's changed its appearance, it's changed its altitude, it's no longer high in the sky, it's a little low down, but it's the same exact water, just in a different format. Torah is the same thing. When we learn Torah, we're reading about personality change, character traits, we're learning about he and she, about this, that, and the other, all sorts of mundane expressions of Torah. But it's the wisdom of Hashem, just like Torah in heaven. Just like heavenly Torah is the wisdom of Hashem, the Torah that we're learning isn't just logic, isn't human logic, it's godly wisdom in a different form. It's translated in the form that the human mind can comprehend. It's related to us, but it's the same Kedusha. And that's why Torah and water are comparison. No, where do you get water from? From the rock. It's not easy to get water out of a rock. It's not easy to learn Torah. It's not easy to get Torah. But there's two ways to achieve that. Sometimes it's a battle, and you end up hitting myself on the head, and we're banging ourselves to get the Torah out. And then there's a different method, which involves just calm, easy, smooth learning of Torah. It says the Mittler Rebbe had Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the rock, it would have made the efforts necessary to learn Torah so much easier for all generations to come. But Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock, and since then we haven't entered Israel with Moshe. Klal Yisrael do not have the ability to learn Torah smoothly. It's a struggle. Our human mind needs to grapple with coming to terms with godly wisdom. Because at the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't come into Israel. Moshe Rabbeinu's smoothness, beautiful clarity of Torah was only translated to us with the hitting of a rock. And therefore we're left with a study of Torah that's one step earlier. What does that teach us? It teaches us that everything I do in this world will have cosmic effects. I might not be Moshe, so it might not affect all of every individual person. But it will certainly have a difference in the worlds upstairs. Lesson number 3. We've done 3 lessons so far. Number 1, we should recognize the simple understanding where we have to hold ourselves to a standard higher than everyone else. We shouldn't sell ourselves short. Number 2, we should believe in the followership. Not just say, oh, you've done it wrong, but believe that they can get it right. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu was expected to not say moirim to the people. And now we've learned that everything that we do will have cosmic effect, will affect the way things are upstairs. Good things cause good things. Not good things cause not good things. But the 4th one, which is the most exciting one, we're going to do in 2 minutes. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. Rabbi Zevin has this one. And he says, Rabbi Zevin says that there's an idea of a rock. And the rock has to give forth water. And he goes on to explain that sometimes a person's heart is like a stone. When you say somebody's got a heart of stone, what do we mean? That the person has no feelings, doesn't care. Heart of stone, cold as anything, not emotional, not involved. In one word, apathy, apathetic, I don't care. And how many times have we been confronted where we're trying to educate, encourage, motivate either somebody else or ourselves, and we're faced with, I don't care, a heart of stone. And we need to draw water out of it. We need to bring life. Water is life. How do we get life out of a stone heart? So Moshe Rabbeinu's approach was force. Force the stone to give forth water. Force this rigid, non-budging individual to, I'll show you who's the boss. I'll force you to do the right thing. Watch this. And I try and encourage and force so-and-so to do what they have to do. Says Hashem to Moshe, Moshe, you need a framework sometimes. And sometimes you need to be strict with your kids. Think of a sports coach or a gym trainer. They're training you, so they're going to make you do something you don't want to do. That framework isn't what's going to change you. What's going to change me is the warmth. Speak to them and speak warmly. Sometimes you need a framework of toughness, but the framework is only the framework within which one can grow. And the growth will come from warmth, not from a stick. And Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is not how you do it. And I just want to put out one beautiful text on the board, which is the text 18 from the Rebbe Sikha, that beautifully sums up how the only way to help someone grow, statistics here, the only way to help someone grow is if you're driven by Ahavas Yisrael. Not Ahavas HaTorah, not love of Hashem and love of its Torah, but if I love my fellow and I care about them, and that's what's driving me to help them, then I stand a good chance. Why? Because if it's out of love for them, starting point, then I'm going to find kind words. I'm going to find a pleasant way. I'm going to find ways to uplift and build up. And that's the fourth lesson that we learn from this story. Moshe Rabbeinu's storyline is written and recorded in the Torah so that we should know. If we want to cause change, growth, motivate somebody else, the only way is to build up with pleasant and calm ways. And with Hashem's help, we should merit to be able to do exactly that. And Be'ez Hashem, we should have, comments are coming through. I love that comment. The idea is that we should have the courage to do all these things, and we should have the success with Hashem's help to continue looking after the, talking about which, I want to say a major Yasher Koyach. Last week, Chabad across the country ran a charity giving day campaign, and I want to say thank you. There was, in Chabad Pressage, 210 donors came together in 28 hours, and with Hashem's help, tremendously, thank you for making it the success it was. We beat the goal, we're in the bonus round. It's still open for the next 24 hours till 10 o'clock tomorrow if anyone wants to still join. But I want to say that the money that was put in, which is going directly straight back into the community, was just humbling. Enormous. For some people, they could give 5 or whatever it was, whoever one gave what they could give. But it was so heartwarming to see how much people care. So thank you, everybody who got involved. Yasher Koyach, the Eibush should bench each and every one of you for getting involved and for doing so, and give you all the brachas, with health, with happiness, with clarity, with peace of mind, with uplifted hearts, with passion and motivation, 24/7, 365, 770 years and more. It should be a gebench devach. Don't forget the energy of Yud Beis Tammuz. Don't forget that we're in the week of Mashiach, and Hashem should bench each one of you with blessings of success. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask or to chat. And I wish you all a wonderful week. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Amen.
Bye.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night. Take care.